Hello, and we are back for our final session of gridXdays 2022. A mix of emotions here, but what an amazing 3 days it's been. And this final session, we'll be talking about the search for energy talent. So according to IRENA, the number of workers in the energy sector will grow at least 8-fold by 2030, reaching 139 million to minimize global warming to 1.5 degrees. So that's a lot of change, a lot of new positions, switching from fossil fuel industries to renewables. And if we don't find the people, it will act as a major barrier to the energy transition. So how can we ensure that we can find the people, fill those roles, and make sure that they're constantly upskilling and enabling the energy transition? To answer that, I have in the studio here with me our very own Nadine Buchegger, who is a talent acquisition manager at gridX. She joined in spring this year, moving from Vienna to Munich. Before joining the gridX team, Nadine gained experience at several companies in several fields. For example, at Peek & Kloppenberg Holding, Motel One Group, and BMW. She has a strong background in human resources and people management, always on the lookout for talented, but most importantly, motivated professionals. Thanks for being here, Nadine.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited.
Me too. We also have Charmaine Coutinho, is Head of Client Training at LCP Delta. Prior to her current role, Charmaine led the consultancy business, focusing on new business and capability development. She has experience in consultancy and energy companies. Her particular experience is with product and service innovation in the renewable energy and energy retail sector. Prior to joining LCP Delta in 2017, she spent 5 years at the UK supplier Good Energy, and before that, she gained expertise at Solar Century. Charmaine, thanks for being here.
My pleasure. Lovely to meet you all.
And we also have Thomas Heywood, who is co-founder and technology headhunter at WeEngage Group. He previously worked at recruitment companies as a technology headhunter. Headhunter is a really difficult word, and team leader. With this experience, he's developed a proven track record of successfully collaborating with world-class organizations, ranging from startups right through to internationally established organizations. WeEngage supports businesses from the clean tech and health tech industries by finding like-minded professionals who care about making an impact in the world we live in. Thomas, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much for having me.
Our
Very
pleasure.
looking forward to today. Thank you.
Me too. And finally, we have Juliane Schuster, who joined UnternehmerTUM, Europe's leading centre for innovation and business creation, back in 2017 as program coordinator, later becoming project lead, before starting her current position in educational design and facilitation at the UnternehmerTUM Academy for Innovators. Juliane, welcome to the panel.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Good. All right, let's go straight into the questions. So Charmaine, where are the major skills gap in the energy sector at the moment?
So yes, it's really, really interesting. I think there's two ways of kind of looking at the skills gaps in the energy sector. And I think one is around this big picture transition from old carbon heavy energy sector to kind of low carbon. And there's a really obvious, I suppose, skills gap, and that is really about the technical experience. So we're going for these big oil and gas infrastructure projects to solar and wind power, effectively. And they're very different industries. They've got some transferable skills, but they are actually kind of big energy assets. And I think there's that kind of experience, the technical experience around solar or wind or heat pumps that is kind of missing, really. And I think there's already a gap in that sector. So the engineering trades generally are getting older, and they're not very gender diverse. So I think there is an opportunity as we kind of go through that transition, and we have this gap to kind of really make something of it, really. So you've got this kind of big energy infrastructure gaps. But I think there's the second piece from my perspective actually really is around the energy transition. So we're moving not only from high carbon fossil fuels to low carbon, but also the energy system is really changing in that transition. So it's becoming much more digital, much more connected, and much more democratized and decentralized. And that's kind of quite a different structure and requires different kinds of skills and way of thinking about delivering products and services to homeowners and thinking about homeowners. So anyone in the sector now or coming into the sector kind of needs to be much more aware of things like consumer needs and data science and what to do with data. But I think one of the most important things is just understanding the whole scope of the transition. I don't think people who work in the sector can really just focus on, I'm an expert in EVs, and not really think about everything else that's going on in the sector. I think it's much more holistic than that, really. But yeah, so that's what I think the big skills are at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Juliana, would you add anything to that?
Yeah, so I mean, the big question is here, how do people deal with all the complexity, the insecurity that is involved in nowadays job decisions and changes. And so what we focus on is actually the entrepreneurial mindset that comes in really handy to deal with this kind of uncertainty, not eliminate it completely, but you have a sort of a process how to go about it. And combine these different fields, bridge between the different fields, and have this holistic perspective on the industry.
And to fill the roles that we need, Thomas, do you think we should focus on domestic markets or international talent?
So it's a question that's always asked by our customers, particularly. Personally, for me, we should always focus on the domestic market. I think it's fantastic that we should be looking for people and professionals that are in our homegrown kind of talent pools from our home countries, because they are coming out of the education institutions that we have. We should be promoting things like apprenticeships. I think Charmaine mentioned there that there's kind of like an aging population in terms of the skills that we potentially need. So we should be promoting those apprenticeships and working students for organizations that are based inside of Germany or Europe already. And I think it's really critical that we try to retain that talent within our own countries as well, because people do move around, for example. And also it might be a little bit easier to onboard professionals from the domestic market. However, our businesses should be ready to be welcoming to international talent as well. And there is a skill shortage, which might mean that we need to innovate, look at different countries, but also at the same time, make sure our business is set up for success to onboard those people. I think one of the massive advantages to Germany and a couple of other European countries is the fantastic blue card visa that welcome. It's very easy to obtain due to the kind of standards that you guys have in Germany of accepting people from around the world. But also people want to move to Europe due to the high standards of working, specifically Germany. For example, with the UK, it's significantly harder, mainly due to Brexit, but to other visa difficulties, which means it's much harder to attract international talent into the UK.
Do you want to provide a German perspective then, Nadine?
Well, yeah, I totally agree. There with Thomas, I think it is very easy to relocate people from the European Union, but as soon as it is outside of the borders, and if there's no, agreement with the country, it's really hard to get people on board. And a lot of people do hesitate, even applying, because they know there is a relocation process involved that, takes 3 or 4 or 5 months. And I think at this point, it is really important for employers and companies to put a message out there to say, you know what, guys, we know there might be a relocation process involved, but we are willing to wait for you because we believe in your talent. We need your talent on board. And I think this is how you can, compensate the lack of maybe applications. But international market is upcoming, and it's super important to fill some vacancies nowadays.
Mm-hmm. And how can we encourage skilled people to make the switch to the energy industry?
Well, that's a really interesting question. And I don't necessarily think it's all about encouraging. I think first and foremost, we really need to create awareness of the energy industry and to make sure everyone knows it's an interesting and attractive field of work, not only to energy people, but especially to non-energy people of whom we're talking right now, right? I think there are a lot of people out there that don't even know that there are some profiles that don't necessarily need energy background. And there are profiles in other industries that have very much similarities or parallels that we can, make use of, or that their profiles can easily be adjusted to the energy world. And as soon as that awareness has been created, I think the encouraging can start from a people and culture, from a recruiting perspective. Obviously, it's a two-way street. Candidates need to be bold and need to make the step out of the comfort zone, hand in their application. And then it's all about the recruiting process and the people and culture team to really secure them and give them the commitment that the door is really open for non-energy people to have a fair and real chance in the process. And this is what it's all about. And it's you know, just making them aware that the change into energy is worth it and that it's you know, really benefiting both parties in the long run.
Mm-hmm. And Thomas, what do you think about that one?
Yeah, we see a lot of that in software engineering specifically. A lot of companies for the clean technology market do require some type of technical expertise from software engineering or architects, for example. And many of these professionals are coming from finance background or they're coming from insurance, for example, and they don't realize that companies such as gridX actually exist. And that's the task of us in the market to make sure that they're aware that they can apply their skills to the energy market, even if it's a simple things or procedures such as software engineering or architecture, for example. So there's many industries that we see that happening in where we can, like Nadine mentioned, their profile definitely suits the energy market, but people need to be ready to embrace them and bring them into the market.
And Juliana, we talked about educating people so that they know that there are jobs in the energy industry, that there's a lot of potential with the energy industry. How can we educate people about that?
I would actually like to broaden and specify. So I would like to educate people to take on positions in, let's say, future fit industries. I mean, energy has been very old traditional for a long time. So what I would like to encourage people to think about these future fit industries where they can actually make a difference. And what we see in education, so you have a point in time when you choose after school what you want to do, you do an apprenticeship or you go to university and study. So you have that point of uncertainty, you go for one decision. Oftentimes it's based on what your friends do, the interests you had in school. So it's not that much core to your personality at that point in time. Then you go through your studies and become subject matter in some sense. And at the end of your studies, you have another phase of uncertainty where you don't know what you actually want to do. And you're not aware of different roles, different positions, different career paths that you can take. And I think there is there's a major gap in education that we also try to fill at UnternehmerTUM, because we think that what you really need to do in addition to your hard skills is get to know how to deal with this uncertainty and the complexity that you will find in the job market, and also be aware of your own values, of your own strengths, and have a vision of what you actually want to do with the skills that you get in at university or at your school. So there's a lot of potential out there. I think it's a lot of learning about yourself, so a self-discovery process and a self-leadership process that you will also need in a very fast-paced environment in your job in the future. And so what we try to do here is give students, but also professionals, a safe space at university courses or at education offerings to actually learn about themselves, to learn about their own self-efficacy, which I think is a major benefit if you feel that you can actually make a change in the world. And then you will automatically in some way direct your path towards these future fit industries, because you want to make a difference. And as we know, I mean, the energy sector currently is a sector where you can have a huge impact and make a big difference in the world. But you need to have this time and space to actually deal with these questions. And also learn from others. So I think what also current traditional education focuses on a lot is, I mean, lecturer, students, you have this role model, but you don't engage that much. And what we try to do here and are very hopeful that it works is have a lot of peer exchange and have these paths made available to students. So there's so many different ways you can go. And it's really great to just meet and talk to people, to ask your questions. What is it like to be in the energy sector? What is it like to found a company in the energy sector? And what is it like to, let's say, work with gridX and be a talent acquisition manager? So these are questions that students usually don't get to ask anyone during their studies.
And Charmaine, In your experience, does the energy industry have fairly good retainment? And, if it does, how can we keep that, or how can we improve that?
So I really think it does. I've been working in energy for about 15 years, and actually what Juliana said actually really resonated. I spent probably the first 5-10 years just kind of not knowing what to do, just trialing out different jobs, see whether they fit. And I fell into energy because it fitted my skills in a particular job. But I think once you're there, it's such an interesting market. And I think there's these little points in time. So for me, it was that job, but for other people, it might just be, I don't know, a bill shock. So they've got a high energy bill, which starts people thinking about energy in a way that, I don't know, energy is just always has really just been there. You can put your lights on. You kind of don't really notice it in your bill. But now I think that conversation is changing. Obviously, prices are very high at the moment, but also I think people make the link much more quickly between energy and climate change. And I think the change in how people are talking about climate change and personal impact, certainly over the 15 years I've been working, it's been exceptional in the last 5 years. So I think there's a real kind of tipping point of people realizing actually energy is interesting, and it's much more complex than, your energy meter and then like some wires. On the flip side, I don't want to tell people it's a really complicated market, so you don't want to put people off, but there is that kind of complexity which makes it really interesting. So I think that's why people tend to stay. There's just so much that needs to be fixed. I remember realizing how physical, how much this was down to wires and grid lines, and how fragile that didn't seem quite right. But also I think it's, just going back to climate change and doing something for good comment. My old boss, he came from advertising. I think he sold trainers, I don't know, something like that. And after having a conversation with a colleague about recycling, he's thought to himself, actually, I want to be in a business where the more I sell of it, it makes a more positive impact. So he switched to renewables. And I think it was that kind of realization that you can do something with your old skills, which actually do have a positive impact. So I think that's one of the reasons why people will stay in the kind of a new kind of energy world. I suppose one thing that I've noticed that might stop people staying is that people are getting poached by other industries. So for example, the finance sector is looking to invest in all these amazing startups in the energy sector. And actually, I think they're taking a lot of the intellectual capital out of the direct kind of in-house energy sector and pulling it into finance, who are just, they're going to invest back. So it's not the worst thing in the world, but it's a shame that you can't retain some of those skills in the sector, really.
Mm. And Nadine, do you think, I found it really interesting, Charmaine, that point about the complexity of the industry and, the constant challenges that it offers. Do you think that is a draw card for talent?
Is the energy sector complex? Yeah, I experienced that myself. I didn't have any touch points with the energy sector before I joined gridX, but the one thing talents out there need to be aware of is trust in their skill set and in their competences and in their self to really believe that they can also have a career in energy. And this is not only for, young professionals, for professionals or like seniors, whatever level. This is super important to be aware of. And I think there's also one important thing that she said is that the doors need to be open, especially for young professionals, to really find out if the energy sector is an industry that they feel comfortable with or that they want to stay. Because I think the sooner we open the doors, the sooner we offer apprenticeships, internships, working students position, we can really catch people, because we all know otherwise we wouldn't be here, that the industry is really worth staying. And I think this is what it's all about. And the young people are the future. It's the pipeline.
Yeah, absolutely. We've had a question from the audience. Starting with a comment, we talk a lot about attracting talent. Is it possible to maintain and retain existing oil and gas people? Many of them may feel put off by the word transition. Thomas, what do you think about that?
It's an interesting comment for sure. It really comes down to personal preference, and if they understand the reasons, I think, why we need to change. If we need to make an impact, we need to make that transition, and realistically, does that individual understand why we are in the current situation we are with the energy crisis and the climate crisis? So I think it is quite an individual kind of something that the person who is wanting to or look at the new energy transition needs to think about themselves realistically. Do I understand why we need to make this move to clean energy, for example?
Charmaine, what about in your experience of kind of the communication around transitioning people from fossil fuel-based industries to renewables?
Yeah, I think it's really, so we do a lot of training in our sector of people who are coming to the energy sector and the kind of new energy sector as a kind of introduction, and then looking at specific newer technologies. But developing some courses around that, I had found a PwC report around, they do a green jobs barometer. And it's really interesting. So they've got an interesting way of looking at how you transition what they've termed sunset jobs, which I find is a slightly horrific phrase, but that's the kind of jobs that will kind of will cease to be because of climate change targets or even just strategic company targets. And they kind of analyze which ones will kind of need a little bit of training, or will just kind of switch to being green. So for example, a HR manager in an oil and gas firm, if the company switches to being a more green company, then they will just start hiring job roles which are green ones rather than kind of fossil fuel based ones. But then within that, they kind of look at pathways for how and how much you might need to retrain people. And I think they referenced a statistic which is in Scotland, which has got a very large oil and gas in North Scotland, oil and gas industry. They think that there's about 10% of those jobs that won't be transferable or adaptable in some way to the green technology, which I thought was a fantastic. You know, it's not 50%. We're not talking about 90%. We're talking about 10%. And retraining for those jobs would be very expensive, but actually it makes it feel much more achievable and manageable. And I think the point about using the word transition, I mean, it is a transition, but it doesn't necessarily, I think a transition is better than, I don't know, a revolution. I don't know what the alternative would be, but I think it hopefully is. I'm not in that position. I don't work in oil and gas, and I can see the complexities, particularly, you know, the similarities between the reduction in like mining jobs. There's the same kind of fear around that, and that must be a pretty scary thing. But I think there is a lot to be optimistic about, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And Thomas, in your experience, what are job seekers most focused on at the moment?
Sure, it's a big question. It's an individual. Everyone obviously is a little bit different on what their personal or what they're currently most focused on. But we're seeing job seekers look for organizations that have a real impact, regardless of the industry that they're going to move into, whether that's kind of solar regeneration, energy, for example. And they want to work in industries that have a real impact. And they're looking for organizations that have a really strong why. They're looking for organizations that really understand the reasons why they are doing what they are doing, and it's really clear. Technology as well, they're looking, as we mentioned before, the engineering and the energy market can be quite complex. We actually see that as a real positive, because we're seeing candidates wanting to work for quite complex businesses or have complex products, for example, in the energy sector. It helps them gain better knowledge of an industry, and it really tests them. But they're also looking for companies that have really strong leadership as well, and they're looking for organizations that can empower them. We've seen a massive shift of kind of this micromanagement culture in some businesses shift now to more empowerment culture, which allows people who have been hired for a reason to be successful in their job. So it's not a directionless management, but we give them some direction, and they creatively come up with solutions and solve the why of what the business is looking to achieve.
Mm-hmm. And Nadine, how do you think people's priorities have changed since COVID?
Well, they changed. I think not only on a professional level, but also from a personal perspective. I think a couple of demands or wishes and priorities when it comes to jobs have been there prior to COVID, but they only speak up now, and they make us hear what they want. And obviously benefits is a major thing nowadays. People want to have flexibility, flexible working hours, new work, not only 2.0, they want 15.0. And it's sometimes hard to match the expectations, but it's just super important to jump on the same train and really make sure that we're meeting in the middle here. And why not have someone have a workation? I mean, we all missed out on traveling. Why not take your laptop with you, work the entire day and then enjoy the city? That's, it's what people want nowadays. And that's what we as employers should give them in order to have happy, satisfied, and long-lasting employment and employees in the company. I also think on top of that, people are also having like soft priorities when it comes to their jobs. They're looking for, just like Thomas said, sustainability, work environment. They are looking for a job where they actually love what they do. They're looking for a job where they can have an impact on the world. And also they're looking for like a nice and really cool workplace culture. Everyone basically in an interview asks me, what's the culture like? What's the vibe? What's the spirit with you guys? And on top of that, and in a combination, it's also the appreciation that a company gives towards the employees. I think this is what really rounds it up when it comes to priorities nowadays.
Mm-hmm. Would anyone have anything to add on that?
I just have to pretty much echo everything Nadine is saying. From a headhunting perspective, these are kind of the top 10 things that our candidates are looking for. And again, culture is massive. It's something that I didn't add on, but it's huge for people. They want to work in businesses that just get stuff done. I won't say what gridX's slogan is, but it is get stuff done as quickly as physically possible and make a change.
Yeah. And Charmaine, obviously upskilling is a really important thing for the energy industry as the pace of change is really rapid. How can we ensure that not only new joiners to the industry have the right skills, but also they maintain these skills as things change?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a challenge because there is that pace of change. And there was a time where you could probably understand everything that's going on in the energy sector. One person could do that, and I don't think that single person can do that. So I think what we've seen is a lot of internal knowledge exchange, so people doing kind of informal, kind of almost like peer-to-peer training. But there is also so much free information out on learning, whether it's kind of webinars, podcasts. I think we've seen podcasts as being a hugely, some of them are quite casual, but actually you're getting quite a lot of good kind of primary understanding of what's going on with the market. And I think post-COVID, actually, we've certainly seen as people shift or realign whether they go to as many conferences and have as big budget for training. Things like podcasts and webcasts, I think, have become super popular and something that people have referenced. And I think there is that kind of internal training culture as well. I think a lot more people are looking to do it themselves, really. And I think, especially early in your career, there is so much out there which you can kind of absorb without needing to pay loads of money for a training course.
Mm-hmm. And Juliana, from your perspective, how can we ensure that the next generation is also trained and aware of the challenges that we'll face in the next decade?
I think actually the next generation is very much aware. I think it's a combination of bridging between generations to empower the younger generations to bring in their opinions and give them the stage, let's say, to do what they set out to do. As I said, I think the core is find your own purpose and find a way of how you can use your skills that you gain to the best for everyone, let's say, to the best of the planet. And we can do that by, of course, also making knowledge more available, as Charmaine said, to the public, and make it very democratic to access knowledge. And then also very democratic to access these leadership trainings and an approach and a perspective on how you lead yourself and others throughout the upcoming years, because this is going to be a very challenging time for all of us. So we also have to be very conscious with our own resources that we invest in the challenges ahead.
Mm-hmm. And women in tech and engineering has obviously been kind of an ongoing challenge to try and encourage more women to join the sector. Juliana, how can we encourage them join these roles from the start?
Yeah, I think it's also a transition. We're on a way there. So it started by having more students in energy study fields, in software fields. So it's a question of generations to also reach the end of their university life and enter the job market. I think we can and we have to do still more. There's a lot, I think, also on the hiring side. I'm not too much into that, but I think Tom and Nadine can say a bit more on how we actually frame these jobs, what the job profile looks like, how we can decode, let's say, these positions. And what we try to do and what we see is that women start businesses differently. They look for different things. So I think it's actually a great decade for women entering the job market, because this search for having a purpose, contributing to the greater good, is something that many women have inherently in their identity, and that especially energy companies nowadays will be able to serve. So I think there's going to be, the energy sector is going to become very attractive for women to join. And I think also the workplace in itself needs to change a bit, because women tend to value more the individual support, individual coaching offerings. So having this guidance and this personal interaction towards their career.
Can you add to that from a hiring perspective?
Sure can. From my personal point of view, I jump up and down as soon as I have like women in a process when it comes to tech positions, but not only in like tech in general, but like the industry, the energy industry itself. I think what you said is that the measurements and the actions we take now, they need to pay off like at the end of the line, and we're not at the breakthrough yet. 100%. I think you see a couple of women that are like, brave enough to stand their woman in between all the men around them. But I think the amortization of the actions and the results are only going to be visible in a couple of months, years time, because there still hasn't been done enough. There's still not enough women in the industry. And from my personal perspective, we should push it. Like, why, if there's the same skill set, if there's the same competences, women do not only have the same profiles or the same skill set, they bring in completely different, criteria into a team, into that have different impacts on successes. So I really can only enhance everyone and push everyone towards hiring women in tech, because this is just a benefit to not your success, but also to the company, to the diversification, and to the energy and vibe and spirit there. Yeah,
absolutely. And Charmaine, what about from your experience, upskilling and transitioning people maybe to new roles or things like that? Do you find that women are kind of more hesitant to go into more technical roles, or what have you found?
I don't know. I think that it's a double-edged sword for me, because I think I'm so passionate about getting more women into the energy sector, especially in like STEM and engineering roles, and that's not my background at all. And I think there's a level of kind of sponsorship and engagement on that. And I actually think when you do get women into energy, especially on the engineering side, actually it's really good, as people have mentioned about the diversity of a team. I think when we're looking at upskilling and transitioning people, I think actually in those transferable skills areas, so things like business development or looking at customers or proposition design or finance or HR, actually the representation of women is actually much better than it is in other places. And I think it's about kind of using those examples of those kind of women to kind of really draw a spotlight of how exciting the sector can be, so that we kind of improve those kind of diversity goals across the sector. I think we have seen any kind of key kind of difference between kind of the interest or level of upskilling, but I do think that you do get a lot more interest and kind of self-reflexivity in some of the people who are looking at upskilling. That's not necessarily kind of men or women, but yeah, I think I'm super positive. There's so many amazing initiatives about women in renewables, women in the energy sector, And I think a lot of them are getting a lot of exposure in the last couple of years, which is kind of, yeah, it's great.
Yeah. And Thomas, what about you? Are you slowly seeing more women applying for positions or wanting to go into more technical roles or in the energy industry in general?
Yeah, sure. So it's a big topic for us as a headhunting agency. A lot of our organizations we work with are looking to diversify their engineering teams for all the points that we've raised before. It's great to work in a diverse team, and it brings way more creativity to the business. It helps us solve challenges, but I think we need to start looking sooner and attracting more. Let's talk about women in tech getting into engineering from potentially even earlier than high school or even university. That will mean that we're quite a few years away from seeing even more women into engineering, but we need to improve the amount of people, women specifically, going into technology markets from primary school, for example, which is great because we're seeing more and more schools here in the UK, but also across Europe, offer coding programs, women in tech programs. There's even people offering girls in tech programs where it's becoming cool to start to code. And that's what we need to break down the barrier of, because before it has typically been a very kind of nerdy environment where some people didn't want to break into that. So I think we won't see that change the next 6 months or the next year. I don't think drastically. Definitely, if we do more from a schooling perspective, break down those barriers, we can have a huge impact over the next 5-10 years.
Mm-hmm. And Charmaine, obviously in energy tech specifically, there's a lot of startups, right? And it's difficult for startups to compete with big traditional companies, particularly when it comes to salary expectations and things like that. How can we kind of navigate that as so many startups and scale-ups dominate the market?
You know what? I really wish I had the answer to that question, because I'm sure everyone at LCP Delta would like that. Yeah, I mean, I think in the last year or two, and talking to kind of our networks in the market, so we research with a lot of startups, and the kind of salaries people are expecting at maybe like a junior, mid-level, analyst level are probably, I don't know, 20 to 25% what you might have expected a year ago, if not more. So I think that just shows that there's kind of a lack of availability of candidates in the market. I suppose the whole purpose of our conversation today. But in terms of how can like a startup compete with a big company, well, I think it's Tom that mentioned starting with the why, like what is the company doing? I think really emphasizing that culture, the kind of mission-based element to it. That kind of offsets those salaries. Any potentially kind of getting in on a startup right at the beginning of the journey is such an amazing place to be. And I do think people who are coming to the job market now value those kind of elements much more differently than, say, people 20 or 30 years ago did. So I think it's quite positive to have to kind of emphasize all the other benefits that smaller companies bring, particularly when it comes to being like to opportunities to develop more quickly, being a big fish in a kind of slightly smaller pond. I think it just suits some people better. But on the flip side, actually, it's amazing those kind of large companies, if they can pay these people more money and those people can get to work quicker, they have the opportunity to scale and change the energy sector as quickly as we need it to. So whilst I sit in the kind of small company sector, I think it's amazing that they're both being able to do that. But our HR manager and Nadine, you probably argue differently when it comes to salaries. It's a tough one. We kind of really try and emphasize that kind of upskilling you can do with people, and that's actually really valuable to people, especially at the beginning of their careers as well.
Thomas, would you add anything there from your experience?
I think you covered absolutely everything there, Charmaine, at the end of the day. But I think there's something else that we've kind of seen is it's now a very level playing field. Previously, people would want to work for large corporations, so they have it on their CV. They go to Deloitte from the university or to Accenture, for example, and they thought that these companies kind of held the keys to their future career. But now we're seeing some smaller organizations have way more to offer from a technology perspective. And it definitely is now a significantly more level playing field where we're seeing candidates contact saying, I don't want to work for a big company anymore. I want to do something cool. I want to innovate, and I want to be that smaller fish in a bigger pond. But it's a huge opportunity for us as a business to succeed.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Thomas. And we've had a question from the audience from Conrad asking, what's your best advice for lateral entrants trying to make their step into renewables? Nadine, what would you say?
Well, just like I said, be bold. Try it out. No one knows if you're a good match with the energy industry. That's for you to find out. But just be bold enough and take the step and try things out with a recruiting process. I mean, Thomas just said it. There's so many startups and scale-ups that are currently revolutionizing the energy sector, especially when it comes to renewable energies. So I think it's worth a shot. And if you don't like it, then don't do it. But I'm 100% convinced that you will definitely find your way into any startup or scale up if you bring the right motivation and if you want to have an impact for the future and for our planet.
Charmaine, what would you say?
Well, I think I'm going to steal a point from Juliana here, which is maybe just take a few minutes to really think about what your skills are. If you haven't got a background in the energy sector, think about what skills you think you have, and then go and try and find a role that fits those, because the energy sector, we've said it's complex, it's hard, blah, blah, blah. You can learn that, it might take you 10 years, it might take you 6 months, it might take you a week, but actually being able to kind of deploy those skills irrespective of the sector is kind of the most valuable thing for any organization. And I think you have so many startups in the energy sector where the founders don't have any background to energy. And actually that difference of thinking is super valuable, I think.
Yeah. We have another question from Jobin. I'll direct this to Thomas. What trends are you seeing in post-pandemic world when it comes to remote work? Are employers still open to 100% remote work, especially when it comes to attracting talent who are not co-located in the same city or country?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's one that is a real hot topic right now, as we're seeing some industries move their people back to the office more. That could be because of kind of the times that we're in regards to the economy. There's still a huge kind of thought out there from some CEOs. I can't give the exact statistic, but some CEOs have previously said, I think it was in a PwC kind of survey, they didn't feel like their employees might be as productive at home, right? But we definitely proved in the pandemic that we are. So I think that's the first point. However, we're still seeing a lot of appetite for remote workers and companies still offering remote working. We're seeing more and more companies. We actually don't have any customers right now. They're in the office 5 days a week. So I think that's a real advantage to everyone for home working, for work-life balance and these things. But still, there are companies choosing this remote method first. And I think that's absolutely fantastic. The difference is we're seeing some candidates after two years being at home now want to kind of move back to the office, which is interesting. I didn't think we'd see that shift so soon, but now we're seeing more and more candidates saying to us, well, 1 or 2 days in the month in the office could be good. And then other candidates saying to me 2 or 3 days in the week could be good. So it's definitely changing ever so slightly, but those remote companies are still out there and they're getting better and better at remote working as we gain more knowledge on how to do that properly.
Did you add anything there, Nadine?
No, nailed it. 100% agreed.
Nice.
Thank you.
Juliana, I wanted to ask you a little bit more about kind of marrying entrepreneurship and, maybe harder skills. What are some of the challenges you see there, and what advice would you give to someone who wants to kind of do that or combine those skills?
I mean, it's always a combination. So when I speak about my work, we work a lot with students from Technical University of Munich. So there's a strong bias towards these hard skill engineering skills, software engineering skills. And in marrying these two elements, I think it only becomes, so what you have in university a lot is you learn the hard skills, but you don't actually practice them. So I think combining entrepreneurship with these normal study programs is actually the one place where it gets real and you feel what you do. So you for the first time, oftentimes the students experience what it's like to be in an engineering role, but also have the holistic view of starting a new project, starting a new company. So I think it definitely needs both. And there's going to be few roles in the future where we don't need the entrepreneurial skills and the mindset, at least the mindset, be it in your company or starting your own company. Yeah, it's absolutely crucial to combine both. And students come to us and they do a first course, so get some inspo of what it's like, and then they want to continue. So especially if you are the prototyping guy and you really want to get things done and build stuff, I think that's a fantastic opportunity to do that as part of your studies, and explore and learn about yourself, and then see where it takes you afterwards.
And who are entrepreneurial skills valuable for? So is it only for founders, for someone who wants to start a company, or is it valuable for people in other positions as well?
Well, coming from an entrepreneurship center, it's valuable for everyone, right? What it basically teaches is a hypothesis-driven approach, reducing uncertainty in whatever project you're working on. So this is valuable as soon as you leave the old waterfall traditional project management. And there's still some value to that, but a lot of situations nowadays require us to have this agile mindset, deal with complexity and uncertainty. And then this entrepreneurial mindset helps everyone. And as I said before, because it's project-based, it's hands-on, it's also a way where you experience yourself completely different from other study courses. So I think even besides the process and the mindset that you get this self-efficacy of that you can actually change something and you can do something. And that is a skill that a feeling that I can only recommend to everyone out there.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. And Charmaine, what would your advice be to someone who wants to either shift to the energy industry, upskill somehow? Where can they kind of gain these skills? Where can they learn new things? And how should they try out new things and know what they're suited to?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. Just something that Juliana just said around the entrepreneurial mindset. I think one of the things that's just a really useful skill is being okay with failing at things. So understanding. So if we look at it from the concept of like climate change and the energy transition, all the things that we'll need to do in the next 5, 10, 20, 25 years, there's going to be things that don't work. And whether you're in a startup or a big company, you don't have to make the right decision each time. So I think that's a really important place to start with. But in terms of some practical things about how to upskill, I think there's so much online e-learning courses, the content around kind of webinars and podcasts I spoke about before. But actually, I think some of the best things are just going to talk to people. I have to say, one of the most useful tools, I think, for learning is LinkedIn. Now, it does get you kind of slightly biased version of different things, but just making contacts and building your networks with people and talking, actually, because everyone in the energy sector I've found kind of really likes talking about what they do and making those kind of contacts and having those kind of conversations and, you know, talking to recruiters or headhunters, actually finding out what's going on in the market, because, you know, people in roles like that will be able to see past maybe skills from another sector or no skills at all if you're a new grad, no professional skills yet. Be able to see that and kind of work out how they can apply in the sector. So I think people are always very helpful, you looking to help people. And then, like, I think proactively looking for internships and things like that. I certainly know in our sector, we don't, if we're not thinking about internships or placements or secondments or anything like that, if someone came to approach us and say, I think I could be good at this, do you want me to work on something? Actually, people are really open to that. They're quite busy, so they might not be able to like think of it themselves and get themselves organized to do a formal process. But if someone came to them, then I think a lot of people are really open to be like, yes, you can fill this need that we have for the next 6 months, and, you know, pay you for it, hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, Nadine, we're not just on a campaign to find people to work at gridX, even though that is a big part of it, where the whole industry needs to attract way more talent and encourage people to switch. How can we increase awareness and education to make people aware that the energy industry is a cool place to work, and what sort of avenues? I mean, Charmaine mentioned LinkedIn, but what else can we do to attract people?
I mean, obviously, a lot of things happen online, but I think it's also the offline events where it's important to attract and reach out to the right people. Go to the point of, the touch points, to the universities, to events where you can find motivated people. I think this is super important as well. And also digitally, there's so many platforms where you can, address people to get you on board. And I think there's one important thing as well to say. It's not only, yet again, this one-way street. Companies need to be open as well to get people on board that maybe don't have any experience. This is for the chance for them to learn, to find out what they're good at. And this is also like a big group that we can address and be open, like, okay, we do have something for you here. Do you want to jump on the train and learn with us? But there's so many different ways, offline, online, on the streets, always having an open eye and an open ear. And also, where to find best people, but in your personal space, there's maybe people in your personal environment that would match a profile. Just, do the word of mouth and get people on board.
Yeah. And Thomas, in your experience, when you're maybe reaching out to potential hires and you maybe suggest the energy industry, if they haven't thought about it, what's, in your experience, what is normally their reaction?
The initial reaction is usually around, what does it mean? And what will I be doing? Because of the complexity behind it. And there's so many different facets to the energy industry. They're usually very intrigued to understand what exactly they will be building. But actually, I would say this is where we come in, and people like Nadine, for example, where it's an entire education piece. And I think we should really see ourselves as educators in the majority of times, because we have to sometimes take them on an entire journey of why the company exists or why this industry exists. And it's down to us to have a deep knowledge also of, how that works, why it works that way, and what the end final product is. But to summarize, usually very intrigued, sometimes a little bit confused, but more times eager to kind of hear more.
Yeah, interesting. We've only got 7 or so minutes left. So I want to kind of go around and ask, if you had one wish to attract more talent or to change the industry or the hiring process or something, what would it be for the energy industry or future-minded industries, as you mentioned, Juliana? Starting with you, Juliana.
I would wish that everyone really takes the time to sit down, think about, what do I value? What are my strengths? And where could I put that into practice to benefit the greater society and the planet?
Absolutely, thanks. And Charmaine?
I think I would go to the opposite side, to everyone like us who's involved in the energy sector to be enthusiastic, positive, and show the potential and the excitement that the exciting kind of careers you can achieve in the energy sector, and that there's something probably for everyone.
Yeah, nice. And Thomas?
I would want companies to be significantly more open to hiring different skill sets and potentially adapting their internal process to accommodate that person. So if they are matching the half of the requirements, for example, don't allow them to fail in another area just because you don't want to change the process. Be very open-minded is what I would say.
Mm-hmm. Nadine?
I'm with Thomas on that. I think companies and especially recruiters every now and then need to think about the other perspective, think about what are they expecting, maybe what do they worry about because what they're missing in their skill set. So taking a step back, distancing yourself from this tunnel vision on energy people that you have is something really important to have a long-lasting employmentship in the long run. That's what's really all about. And if you look at things from another perspective, especially from the candidate perspective, from like a recruiter side, you'll understand more what they want and how you can adjust, your current workplace to maybe having someone on board who doesn't come from the energy industry. So the perspective change and creating awareness of different kind of fields and different kind of candidates and different kind of skill sets is something I every now and then wish for. Yeah, absolutely. So I think we've covered a lot of ground. We need to be bold, communicate, educate people, try and get them from the ground up. Encourage women to apply as well. A lot of things there. Does anyone have any final words or advice that they would give to someone who might want to change into the industry?
Just do it.
Do it.
Network.
Network, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, all of you, for another insightful discussion, and sadly, our last discussion for gridXdays 2022. So we have had a huge range of discussions over the last 3 days. I think there's been 17 sessions, and it's been, about 17 hours of interviews and discussions and panels. So what a range. It's been an absolute pleasure for me to ask all of the questions, moderate all of the sessions. I've learned a lot, and we will be posting all of the videos online on YouTube in the coming weeks, and we'll post that on our LinkedIn. Follow us if you want to rewatch all of the content, including this session. And we will definitely have gridXdays back again next year, probably in November next year. So stay tuned for updates. We can't wait to do it all again, and utilize all of this content that we have from people. Thank you again to all of our panelists for joining us today.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.
All right, over and out. That's the end of gridXdays 2022. Thank you, everyone. Woo.